Welcome back everyone to Gotcha Interact. We'll be taking a look at the second half of the 5.6 banners today. The first character we're going to be taking a look at is Kinich, and then the other character sharing a banner with him is going to be Raiden. Let's go through both of these banners and see whether or not these characters are a good pulling option for you. Now, onto the video.
So the first character we're going to be looking at today is Kinich on the first side of the banner. Now, looking at Kinich, he is a Dendro main DPS. He's going to be the on-field and driver and carry for your team. So looking at him and his kit, he does ascend into crit damage, which is going to be nice because later when we talk about his weapon, that is a crit rate weapon. So that is kind of nice. Looking at his skills, normal attack, nothing really special tied there, but his skill is probably the biggest part of his kit. So let's talk about that. Kinich uses his big game hunting skills to either move swiftly or attack his opponent. When there's an opponent or object that can be attacked nearby, he will attach a grappling hook to the target and enter his Night Soul's Blessing state with 0 Night Soul points. If neither of these is nearby, he will fire a grappling hook forward and swing in midair, and the skill's cooldown is going to be decreased by 60%. This skill can be held to release, and when it is held, Kinich can aim the grappling hook in any direction. Kinich's Night Soul's Blessing state lasts 10 seconds and generates 2 Night Soul points every second. While in this state, Kinich will hook onto a nearby opponent and perform a variable attack. When using a normal attack, Kinich will fire loop shots as he loops around the grappled target based on his current movement direction, dealing Night Soul aligned Dendro damage and generating 3 Night Soul points. Loop shot damage is considered elemental skill damage. When Night Soul points are at max, he can use the elemental skill Scale Spiker Cannon. This is going to consume all Night Soul points to deal Night Soul aligned Dendro damage, and when Scale Spiker Cannon is held, Kinich can aim this shot. After firing the cannon, Kinich will try to grapple to its target. Also, while in Night Soul's Blessing state, after grappling an opponent or firing the Scale Spiker Cannon, a blind spot will be generated next to the opponent. When Kinich enters this blind spot, it's going to disappear and he will generate 4 Night Soul points. You'll be able to see this on the ground, kind of like a zone around the opponent you're kind of swinging around. If the grapple connection should snap due to exceeding the maximum distance or some other reason, using a normal attack will establish a new connection with a nearby opponent before performing loop shots with the skill. Looking at his burst, he's going to unleash the power of the almighty Dragon Lord Kahul Ahau on a limited, conditional, restricted, contractual, partial, and temporary basis, dealing Night Soul aligned AoE Dendro damage. Ahau will unleash his Dragon Breath at intervals, dealing Night Soul aligned AoE Dendro damage. If Kinich is in Night Soul's Blessing when this is used, the Blessing's duration is extended by 1.7 seconds. So overall, the burst is really just some touch of off-field Dendro damage.
With Nod Cry coming out, do those prices inside the shop make you wanna cry? And really looking at it, does this make you feel like you can't get any more Genesis Crystals for yourself? Well, I might have a solution for you. If you want more Genesis Crystals for less, power up your Genshin Impact adventure with Lootbar, the ultimate top-up service trusted by gamers worldwide. With Lootbar, you get instant delivery, secure transactions, and 0 hassle. You don't have to use any passwords with your account to actually get the transactions done, and there's no issues and worries to go about it. Whether you're topping up for Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, or any of the other top gachas, and even other games as well. And here's the best part. New users now get an exclusive 10% discount on their first purchase. That's right, more Genesis Crystals, more pulls, and more fun. Hopefully winning those 50/50s. Now all at the same time going on for less. Now, are you ready to start your journey? Go ahead and check the link in the description down below and check the pinned comment as well to grab your deal now and start stacking up on those Genesis Crystals today. And now, back to the video. The other character we're going to be taking a look at on the banner is going to be Raiden. Now looking at the Shogun, she is going to be ascending into Energy Recharge, which is going to help a lot with her kit, as we're going to see in a second here. She's a polearm character going into Electro, obviously being the Archon for the region. Now looking at her normal attack, there's nothing really special to go on here, but let's go ahead and take a look at her skill and her burst, which is where most of her kit is actually going to be focusing on. Looking at her skill, it's going to state that the Raiden unveils a shard of her Euthymia, dealing electro damage to nearby opponents and granting nearby party members the Eye of Stormy Judgment. With the Eye of Stormy Judgment triggered, when characters with this buff attack and deal damage to opponents, the Eye will unleash a coordinated attack, dealing AoE electro damage at the opponent's position. Characters who gain the Eye of Stormy Judgment will have their elemental burst damage increased based on the energy cost of the elemental burst during the Eye's rotation. Now this also does mean the amount of energy being used for the party, so keep that in mind as well. Looking at the burst, it's the secret art Muso Shinsetsu. It states that it's basically going to do a huge damage hit using the Muso no Hito Tachi and doing a huge bit of AoE electro damage. You're going to be using your Muso Ishin right afterwards in combat for a certain duration as well. The damage dealt by Muso no Hirotachi and the Muso Ishin attacks afterwards will be increased based on the number of Chakra Desiderata's resolve stacks consumed when this skill is used. For the Muso Ishin, while in this state, the Raiden will wield her Tachi in battle. While her normal charge and plunge attacks will be infused with electro damage, these cannot be overridden, and when such attacks will hit opponents, she will regenerate energy for all nearby party members as well. Energy can be restored this way every 1 second, and this effect can be triggered 5 times throughout the burst. And this effect can be triggered 5 times during the duration of this extra infusion. While in this state, the Raiden Shogun's resistance to interruption is increased, and she is immune to electro charge reaction damage. While Muso Ishin is active, the Raiden Shogun's normal charge and plunge attack will be considered elemental burst damage. Looking at the Chakra Desiderata, you're going to see that with the nearby party members excluding the Raiden Shogun when they use their burst, the Raiden Shogun will build up resolve stacks based on the energy cost of these elemental bursts. The maximum number of resolve stacks is 60, and you can get this and will be clear though within 5 minutes or 300 seconds after Raiden Shogun leaves the field. Looking at the bonuses and everything that you have here, there's basically the amount of energy you can basically gather for each of the characters, grab their energy cost, and put it all together. You're going to get 0.2 basically resolve stacks for every energy that's consumed. So add the other 3 characters' energy costs from their burst if you are triggering all of 3 of them, and then multiply it by 0.2 to get the amount of resolve stacks that you're going to be given. Now let's go ahead and jump over into our question section, which we're going to be jumping into next. Now, first and foremost, the first question we have is, do you need either character on your account? Really looking at what elements and roles do you already have, and what do you need, and then also who else already fills the role that you might not actually need the characters for. So looking at the first character, Kinich, as Rift kind of put together, the Dendro Claymore user. Now, with him being a Dendro Claymore, we only either have really one, if I kind of correct in that fashion, looking at Kaveh, and Kaveh is more focusing on Bloom, whereas Kinich is more, if you looked at his kit more or less, you're looking and focusing more in Burning. So they are a little bit separated here. But keep in mind, with Kinich, a lot of the times, he is just pure straight damage from himself. So he cares more about himself and the personal damage. He's not focusing on elemental mastery, so there is a plenty amount of difference between the two. Now, Kinich does a lot of damage, and if he's put in the right team, pairing him with characters like Emily to just have really good synergy for a lot of damage in the team, and then even pairing him with characters like a recent character like Mawika to just have extra, once again, damage and maybe even some buffing capabilities, you can get some pretty strong amount of team comps really with the characters being thrown out here. The thing is that Kinich and someone like Alhaitham are kind of contending for some of the best Dendro DPS in the game. So if you already have someone like Alhaitham, Kinich's necessity to actually have him kind of dwindles. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's absolutely useless, considering, once again, Alhaitham's focusing more in your Quicken, maybe focusing obviously with the spread, but maybe into Hyper Bloom as well, whereas Kinich is really focusing into personal, just straight damage, and he's focusing mainly in the burning aspect. So keep that in mind when you are looking at these two. Technically, you can kind of run them both and still get them both, but if you already have one pretty strong Dendro DPS, it may not be extremely necessary to go after him. Now, if you're thinking that, honestly, you already have some, Dendro supports and whatever, if you have characters like Nahida, Baiju, Yaoya, if you already have a lot of Dendro supports, and especially if they're already built, and you already have some Dendro teams that can kind of work without a DPS, where they're kind of maybe using something else, that can still clear Dendro-specific content, so Nilou Bloom team, stuff like that, where it's not specifically focused maybe around, the Dendro characters, you can still actually get a lot done with those teams and maybe clear content. Then I would say, honestly, wait for the next Dendro character that's coming out. The next thing that we have, though, is Raiden. Looking at the other characters, much as I absolutely love Raiden, and even if you have some constellations on her, really looking at her as a character, if you already have her, and you're maybe thinking, should I go for the C2 or whatever, that's really what most people are going to be looking at. I do think that Raiden's a great and fun character, but there's just too many other Electro characters on kind of the accounts that are going on. So if you don't have an Electro DPS, Raiden is still an extremely strong character. No matter what other people say, she can still clear content pretty well, and especially if you have characters like Kujosara, even Shevers for some overload as well, Raiden can still be an extremely strong character and definitely clear content as needed. That being said, she is not going to be a top meta character anymore, so if you're maybe already have a character like Chloran, or maybe if you already kind of use something else for your Electro in your account and you don't really need this a much Electro anymore, Raiden's not necessarily a must pull for me.
Yeah, and I think you said it all pretty well. I would say, like, the current Abyss is actually a really good gauge for just where Kinich can shine and be really good, because that second half, I don't know if you played it already, but maybe some of you viewers have, that second half really is pushing for Kinich, and if you don't have that, which I don't have Kinich, so Overload was like the play there, and kind of second best, if you will. So Kinich is really good for this Abyss and kind of is a good showcase and reminder of just where he can shine. So if you want a good idea of that, he's really good for that. And then I would totally agree with the Raiden. A lot of people seem to disagree and say that Raiden is just completely out of it, which is kind of, it's a little weird, but it does make sense because, yes, she has been power crept. There's a lot of better options, but like Vixen said, she can still clear the content. And I know that we're not the only ones with that opinion. For example, Jello Impact does have this same opinion that Raiden can still clear content even at C0, provided she has those good teams. Usually the overload teams with Shevers and Kujosara being in there, Bennett. Even the former team with Kazuha is still very powerful. So don't think that she can't clear. She can. And if you have C2 or even the C3, she definitely can. And she's on par at that point, C2 or C3. She's actually on par mathematically, really close to, not like the top 3 or top 5 DPS, but a lot of those DPSs that kind of hover right around 5 and onward from there, like Kinich himself, Chaska, all these other ones. It's just that Varessa and Cloran are way easier to build, first off. Raiden's just a hard character to build, and they're just going to deal more damage for less investment. Raiden just takes a lot of investing into her personal build to get the favorable results that you're looking for. So that's all it comes down to. She still is a worth it kind of a pull, especially if you, like, maybe let's say you have the C1. Picking up that C2 is actually an okay and honestly pretty good idea, just because you already have that C1. You're kind of on path for it. Maybe you have C1 because of a double early in the game, or maybe you have C1 because you knew that later on you want the C2, then yeah, you could still absolutely go for it, because like I said, she's going to be on par at C2 with a lot of these other modern DPSs. But moving on to our next question, this is where we're actually going to talk a little bit more specifically about teams and what teams you're trying to build. So with Kinich, we kind of know at this point that he's a burning-oriented Dendro DPS. He does a lot of Dendro damage, but he does have in his kit things that he wants to be happening, and one of those things is burning. And kind of similar to Emily, where she wants burning to just kind of be happening, especially with that artifact set that she has equipped, just to be happening to kind of increase her personal Dendro damage. And Kinich is kind of similar in that regard. So obviously, Emily's a really good teammate. She's really just personal damage for him, so she's not absolutely required for Kinich, because she's not actually amplifying Kinich. She's just adding more personal damage to the team. In a similar way, you would use someone like Chiori in a double Geo team. Chiori's not helping out anyone. She's just a lot of personal damage. There's other characters like that. So Emily and Chiori are similar in their nature, obviously very different because of their elements, but they have a similar nature as just sub DPS. So Emily's a good character if you have her, but you don't have to have her. As far as characters that would help Kinich, Bennett's really good. Mawika's really good at the off-field pyro. If you don't have Mawika, Toma and Dia are really good. Toma especially, it just feels really comfortable because of that refreshing shield. And even though you are doing some normal attacks in Kinich's skill as you're looped around the opponent, those are considered skill damage, but because you're using the normal attack button, Toma is activating there, and it just feels really comfortable. So Toma's a great option, and when we talk about 4 stars here in our next section, Toma is on this banner, so there's that. So as far as some other characters, obviously other Dendro characters you can think about, Nahida's not completely out of the question. It's just Emily's going to be better because it's a little bit more personal damage. She's fitting into the team better. Nahida's EM buff isn't doing all that much, really. It would really just be helping herself. And also, you're probably not getting Aggravate in the team, because usually you're not running an electric character with Kinich. Now, you can. There's nothing that says you can't do that, and it will still be okay. It's just that he gets a little bit more out of his burning requirements that amplify his personal damage. So Aggravate and Spread can still work if you have to use that. Maybe you don't have another option on your account, like Alhaitham. Maybe you don't have Tainari, which is kind of cool, I guess, because you haven't lost to him yet or something like that. And so you don't have like a solid option for Spread. Kinich can still, be there. He's a modern DPS, and he's going to be somewhat powerful enough to even do a team like that, I would imagine. So those are some of the teams you can do. As far as Raiden goes, because we're now a lot later on in the game than where she released, her teams are going to feel a little bit more restricted just to kind of be able to keep up with the other modern DPS like we talked about a little earlier. So really all you're looking at there is an overload team with Chevrolet, Kujo, Sara, and Bennett, or you can replace Bennett for Malwika or something else if you want to like be flexible and have Bennett for the other side or something. That's kind of the team you're going after. If you're not doing the overload team, you can still do the older version of the team where you use Kazuha. And now you could replace Kazuha with Shilonen, still using Kujo Sara, but this frees up Chevrolet for maybe the other side. Maybe you're wanting to do an overload on the other side and not necessarily for Raiden. The straight res shred and damage bonuses you're getting from Shilonen and Kazuha are still enough that that's a good team. So I don't know about you, Vixen. Do you have any other insights maybe on some teams for Kinich and Raiden?
Well, I think you said it pretty well. I would just remind people, don't forget about Yansan for both of these characters. You were talking about the spread team that you could possibly get with Kinich. Instead of a lot of people's biggest grievance with him not having, once again, you're not losing any actual specific damage. There's no, if I remember correctly, with his kit, there's no actual damage bonuses that you get. It's more or less a lot of technical things that you need to that would help make his gameplay a little bit easier, stacks for certain things that would be a lot better for him, therefore making everything a little bit easier to actually build, therefore allowing him to get stacks of certain things, and therefore making his damage better because it's either more consistent or there's more stacks of it, making his damage higher, but there's no initial damage instances that are better because of the burning, unless I believe we get into the weapon. But I think with him specifically as a character, you can still run that idea, and a lot of people were saying, well, the only reason you would really ever run him outside is if we had an attack buffer like that was a Dendro or an Electro character. And before Bennett, or before Yansan, we just didn't have that. So now that we have Yansan, you're at least not losing too much of that idea of maybe, the idea of making sure I'm losing this huge attack buff from Bennett, and there's some issues there. And then the other thing that comes to mind is with Yansan, in a part of her burst, you also have the idea that the longer you travel, if you're over a certain amount of Night Soul points, I believe it's 42, the more the attack buff is better, basically, based on the distance that you travel. And since Kinich is basically spinning like a Beyblade around an enemy, looped onto them, you're traveling so much with him as a character, this could actually be extremely helpful in getting a really substantial good attack buff through that. So I just want to keep that in mind of how actually well performing that might actually be. Characters, and then you can throw the other Electro character in there for, some extra personal damage. Characters like Fischl, Yaimiko, stuff like that. Even Beto as well, having maybe a shield of some sort. But yeah, I do agree that like Toma and Dia are really great actual extra options. Having the double Pyro and those burning teams is going to be very good for the extra attack buff from him. But then also with Raiden, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of different teams you could use. Obviously, the Overload, like you said, Overload's very restricted right now, especially for Raiden. You want that Kujo Sara. She doesn't have to be C6, but she loses a lot of her value, specifically before she gets to C6, especially with Raiden. But the other character is Chevrolet. I think Chevrolet is a fantastic character for Overload, even if you don't have the C6, does not matter. C0 to C6, still an exceptionally good character. The buffs you're going to get through her are going to outweigh maybe some of the other characters if you try to run that. But yeah, totally, like you said as well, the straight just electro damage team before Chevrolet came out in the Overload idea. Yaimiko, Fischl, Kujo Sara, these extra support characters. Like you said, Kazuha Shilonen, some sort of Viridescent user. Venti as well was working really well with her actually on her release as well, keeping the enemies kind of together before she used her Musuno Hitotachi to do that big damage hit. So you're hitting as many enemies as possible. Bennett's very good there as well. Once again, bringing back Yansan is another great buffing character there. You won't have that extra like distance travel buff, but it's still at least something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I do want to just before real quick before we get onto our next session, just because I know someone's going to say it if I don't. There are other teams you can do for Raiden that aren't just that Overload. That's just kind of like the best team. There is a Hyper Bloom thing, which I'm not going to recommend. First off, Kuki exists. You'd have to just not have Kuki to kind of justify even going after a Hyper Bloom build on Raiden as kind of a secondary thing on the back burner for when you need it. But Kuki's also a healer, so she's just gonna be better there. Yes, Raiden has the kind of range idea where doesn't matter where you're standing. But honestly, if we're being honest, it's just kind of a cope thing to do. But it does work. Okay, it does work, but I'm not going to recommend to do that. And yes, there are the national teams. The national teams in Raiden are actually very comfortable throwing characters in there like Farina Yelan doing a double Hydro, and then maybe even Xiangling. That's a comfortable team, and also ignores kind of removes Xiangling's energy problem just because of Raiden's kit giving her back her energy. So there's all kinds of variations of just national teams that Raiden can do, and all of them are very comfortable, really powerful, and can definitely do some content.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is if you're looking at Raiden, I think that's the thing with this question is we're looking at, how, the teams that you can run are great and all, but a lot of people just really want to know how strong are we looking at? And so when you really look at it, the better teams are going to come across as maybe the national team, depending on the supports you have, but those supports also heavily depend on, being extremely good and therefore taking some of those teammates out of other teams and therefore making your Abyss run possibly worse by taking out a character like Farina, who could be really strong in the other half, something like that as well. So that's just, once again, something to just think about as you're running through these. But usually the Overload and the straight just electro damage are the teams that don't take too much away from some other teams at the same time while being extremely strong and puts her on par with a lot of other DPS. Now, looking at the next question we have is, do the 4 stars change your pulling plans? Now, Rift, what are the 4 stars that are on here?
We have Toma, we have Kujo Sara, and we have Lynette. Those are the 3 4 stars on the banner. And so at first glance, it looks pretty good. And at a second glance, it looks okay. It's okay. I mean, Kujo Sara is there, so that's obviously going to be really great for Raiden. And there's even uses for Kujo Sara, especially if you have that C6. Outside of that, I know a lot of people tie her down to Raiden, but if you kind of think outside the box, there are instances where Claran can use it, Varessa can use it, Sino can even use it. Now, obviously, it's not as good because the buff that Kujo Sara is giving is very short-lived. It's like, I think it only lasts 6 seconds. So it's kind of tailored to Raiden, where Raiden is a quick swap already and has that massive hit at the beginning. So it's always being buffed, and it just makes sense. And that's also lore accurate between, Kujo Sara and Raiden's relationship. So that's kind of cool. But just know that she can be used elsewhere because it is just giving an attack buff. So any character that likes attack can technically actually use Kujo Sara. And then with Toma, obviously it's going to be pretty good with Kinich, the budget option here to be paired with him. Do note, though, that if you have characters like Clarand, or maybe something else there, you can actually do a Overload team, and he's a good candidate to be in really, honestly, any Overload team, if you think about it, as a budget option, or if you just want the comfort option because of that refreshing shield, provided that the main character, the main DPS you're using, is doing normal attacks to keep his barrier kind of refreshing, and also to continue the pyro application from off-field. There are some other things you can do, like Burgeon Toma is actually pretty comfortable, pretty fun. And if you are put in a scenario where you need to use Burgeon, if we ever get, like, per se, the Iniquitous Baptist in the Abyss again, Burgeon's really good just because it's requiring all of these different elemental things to just be happening kind of sporadically. So Burgeon and Hyperbloom do good against that. And whenever I had to fight that, using Toma and a Burgeon kind of from off field was really comfortable and really fun too. It's a fun team to do, and it's easy to build a Burgeon build on Toma. It's easy to build a Burgeon build on Toma because it's just straight EM and then just level up the character. Really easy to do. Very similar to Kuki on EM build.
Yeah, I think like overall, the 4 stars aren't really going to change your pulling plans most likely. Toma does have the ability to still be on that, as you were talking about earlier with the team section. Toma still is a good character technically for both characters here. He's probably the quote-unquote star. Now I know usually Kujo Sara is basically stuck to Raiden. It's lore accurate, it's team accurate. You're just going to be stuck to where Overload teams, even technically, I guess technically a national team would even still work. It's not normal, but it still could work. And then obviously that original just pure electro damage team as well. But even still, that's basically where she's kind of stuck. Toma, on the other hand, can work with Kinich, as we talked about earlier, because it is still technically elemental skill damage. You're still using the normal attack button though, so he's still proccing that normal attack, therefore getting some application out for burning for Kinich, but at the same time also overload as well for Raiden. Technically, he could still be there as an overload option. Also, like you were talking about for Cloran, but he still works for that idea as well with them. Technically, Raiden is in a similar fashion. Those attacks that she's doing, that infusion she gets from her burst, is elemental burst damage, but even still, it is still using the normal attack button, so that's why you don't have to level into the normal attack. You only really have to level into maybe the skill, but mainly the burst. And then that's kind of, once again, similar idea to with Kinich with his skill. It's not normal attack damage, it's elemental skill damage, but you're still using that normal attack button, so it still does proc. At the same time, that will help maybe with overload with those teams. And then Lynette here at the very end is, most people are just going to be using her as a Viridescent Swirler person. I threw her and made her use as a DPS, and I know some people do that as well, just to maybe have like a fun 4-star DPS, especially if you get to her C6. Before C6, she kind of just becomes that support unit, and you could still make her a fun 4-star DPS. Not going to be as strong as someone like Gaming or Hazo or something like that, really the stronger 4-star DPSs, unless you put a lot of time and effort into them. But really not going to be a content clearer, more or less a character that could be fun and useful for some Imaginarium Theater. I know I've used her as a DPS, as like a kind of, even really still keeping her on maybe a Viridescent set sometimes, to just still run her maybe with like a national or just a soup team, to just maybe have that type of thing going on. So you're still helping the other characters while still getting some fun damage out from her, but you're mainly helping out the other characters from their off-field damage. So these 4 stars, in my opinion, don't really change pulling on the banners. These are some older units at this point, and I know Kinich is still Natlan, and you know that is still a strong character, but these units just are really kind of pull fever, if you will. They're really just trying to, maybe if you've been waiting a long time for Kinich, you've been waiting a long time for Raiden, that's when you're going to be pulling these characters, not necessarily a banner that you're going to necessarily be pulling on an extreme amount. But beyond this, though, we have our last question, which is, do you need the weapons? Quickly going over both the weapons here. At level 90, Fang of the Mountain King, Kinich's weapon, you're going to get 11% crit rate with an extremely high base attack at 741. And the R1 ability states that it will gain 1 stack of Canopy's Favor after hitting an opponent with an elemental skill. This can be triggered once every 0.5 seconds, and after a nearby party member triggers a burning or burgeon reaction, the equipping character will gain 3 stacks. This effect can be triggered once every 2 seconds and can be triggered even when the triggering party member is off the field. Canopy's Favor, Elemental Skill, and Elemental Burst damage will then be increased by 10% when you have Canopy's Favor, and this will have it going on for 6 seconds with a max of 6 stacks. Each stack is then also counted independently, so it can be kind of, these stacks will each have a 6-second duration. It's not basically like they're not all sharing 6 seconds. Each stack will have its own timer of 6 seconds when it's triggered, meaning you can always have it being procced, therefore always keeping yourself refreshed at 6 stacks. So now you're seeing even a little bit more how burning with Kinich can still be done with like maybe some interesting, you know, aggravate teams if the enemy still has pyro on it, or you still have a pyro and an electro character in there maybe somehow, some way. But the more you know, burning that's being triggered, or even Burgeon as well in his kit, is still technically triggering this effect, therefore allowing him to get more damage out. So once again, it's not initially giving him more damage, like specifically by triggering Burgeon. It's triggering Burgeon, which then gives him stacks, which then helps him do more damage in the long run. Then looking at Engulfing Lightning, which is Raiden's weapon, it's going to, at level 90, give 55.1% energy recharge with a base attack of 608. At R1, it states that the attack is going to be increased by 28% of energy recharge over the base 100. So take the amount of energy recharge you have, subtract 100, and then multiply it by 28%. You gain a maximum bonus for this attack of 80%, and you will gain 30% energy recharge for 12 seconds after using an elemental burst. So that's really just basically kind of obviously focuses along with her as a character. Everything she does is based off of energy recharge. Crit is actually a secondary option to her energy recharge because of how much she gets from it. Energy recharge, attack, and crit is kind of her big things. Fang of the Mountain King is a little bit interesting. I'll just go quickly over it. I think that this can be used on some other characters, but personally, not a huge fan of it all in all, just because of the desire for the consistent amount of burning and burgeon that you want to be procced. So unless the character doesn't have or has that option, it's not going to really be an exceptional weapon to go after, especially if you're not pulling it for Kinich. If you happen to accidentally get it, it can be a stat stick for the high base attack. It does have a low crit though, so that is kind of hurtful as well. And once again, you really have to make sure you're triggering Burning or Burgeon in the team somehow. Besides that though, Engulfing Lightning has plenty of usages among many different characters. It can be a very good stat stick for a lot of damage characters that also like ER, so characters like Xiangling. Obviously, Raiden herself is the personal character, but any real polearm character that still likes to do some damage, but ER is still a very big part of their kit, is still actually very helpful here. Characters even like Shenhe or whatever that still like attack, but also the energy recharge helps them get their burst back mainly, can still be pretty helpful for this. So Rift, I don't know. Looking obviously at these weapons, I think Engulfing Lightning has a little bit more value, probably a lot more value if anything than Fang of the Mountain King, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just give my personal feelings too, because I may have some difference of opinion here. But when I look at the weapon banner just overall, the weapon banner is not like really good value. Both weapons, if you don't have the characters, are just kind of, besides engulfing, are going to be sitting around for the most part. The thing with Raiden and Kinich specifically, and seeing if you actually want the weapon for their personal power, Raiden can use the catch, and it's not that far off from engulfing. So if you're needing to save the pulls and finding any excuse to do it, then you don't have to pull Raiden's weapon. And I think the same thing can be said for Kinich, because his second best is Malwika's weapon. And Malwika is a character that a lot of people went for, or maybe you're thinking about when she gets a rerun, because she is due for a rerun. She hasn't had it yet, but she had her first run in 5.3, and so we should be getting her very soon. Malwika's weapon's really good for Kinich, and even if you are using Malwika in his team, because she's just an off-fielder, she's okay to use a 4-star weapon or just something else, because she's more there to help buff him with her passive and just have some off-field pyro app. But her damage still is, something to think about. But she doesn't like need her personal if she's not the main DPS. But if she is the main DPS on the other side, that's when you'd have to kind of think about that and maybe do some swaps and stuff. There still is Earthshaker though. That 4-star craftable weapon, in fact, is still very good for Kinich, and Kinich is powerful enough that he can get away with that. As a modern DPS, that's okay. But even with Raiden, the catch is just so good that that's still okay, and you still will clear content without having engulfing. I know some people will be like, no, that's impossible because Raiden's so old. But no, that's actually, the numbers say that you can. So just know that you can, basically. So overall, my advice and my opinion would just be maybe to just stay away from the weapon banner unless you just really want the personal weapon for the character. Maybe you're just pulling for the drip. If you're pulling for the drip, go for it, because honestly, Kanichi's weapon looks really good, and honestly, Raiden's weapon looks really good. It's just they're cool looking weapons, and usually for the most part, the weapons just look good. The design team just knows what they're doing. So if you're pulling for drip, go for it. But otherwise, if you're caring about well spent Primogems, well spent pulls, and just good pulling decisions, I would think twice is all I would say.
I think that that's most banners, to be honest with you. And that's why I said, like, if you're caring about the characters, go for the weapons. Just keep in mind, if you go for the weapons, watch out on how if you lose to the weapon and get the other weapon on the banner, how that could actually hurt and affect you. I think overall, though, it's really stated for most of the time, unless you really like the character, it's pretty easy to just stay away from the banners, because most characters can use other weapons, and there are really good 4-star options, especially for these characters, like you said, Rift. So I mean, it's just some extra fishing, or it's just some extra runs over to the crafting bench, or just getting it made basically for the weapon for Earthshaker. So it's really just two different kind of sides of the equation. Especially this banner though, it has way less value to actually pull for it. Whereas maybe some other banners, even if they are very good weapons, like Malwika's weapon or something like that, and even Silali's weapon, that banner was really good for the weapon banner. Even still, it's very, unless you really just like to have the characters with their weapons, like you are like us, where they have to have their personal weapon, that's just kind of something you want to have done. If it's not like that, it's really not necessary, even with DPSs, to really specifically have their weapons. It's a good idea, it will definitely help you out, and DPSs have much more usability, in my opinion, than the supportive weapons. But at the end of the day, weapons are not exactly needed all the time. Getting more characters and filling up your account is definitely more necessary, so saving those future pulls for a separate character would definitely be a better play than going after some weapons.
Well, we hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or weapons are a good pulling decision for you and your account. As always, if you have any suggestions or just questions to bring up that may help other players as well, go ahead and let us know down in the comments below. And thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.